Hello and welcome to Pencils Down, a podcast about education, policy, policy education, and everything in between. My name is Sam Zuckert, and this is episode 1, Gifted and Talented. Being episode 1 and all, I thought we'd do a quick syllabus review before we get started. Each episode of Pencils Down will have 3 sections: Study Hall, School Days, and the Chicago Policy Review. In Study Hall, we will talk with someone who has had interesting experience or insight into current education and policy issues. For School Days, we will interview a guest about their own personal educational journey, the schools they went to, the experiences they had, and how that impacts where they are today. And at the Chicago Policy Review, we will interview a writer from the Chicago Policy Review about a recent article they published. The recent article will probably be about education policy, but if it's not, we'll try to make them talk about education anyway. All right, now on to the good stuff. Our guest for Study Hall today is Taylor Ortiz, a second-year graduate student at the University of Chicago's Harris School of Public Policy. Taylor grew up on the north side of Chicago, and after college, she taught middle school math and science for 3 years at schools in Chicago Public Schools and the Archdiocese of Chicago. The impetus for today's discussion was New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio's recent announcement about his plan to overhaul the city's Gifted and Talented program, a controversial program that tracks students into different classrooms starting in kindergarten based on a test result. Tracking, the practice of separating students based on academic ability, is a much-discussed practice nationwide, and Taylor joins us today to share her experience as a teacher on the front line of these contentious policy debates. Taylor, thanks so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, so let's hop right in to the politics of the situation. Now, Mayor Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City, made this major announcement about the Gifted and Talented program with less than 3 months left in his term. As someone who taught in a classroom in a large city, what do you make of a large city mayor making an announcement like this at a time like that?
I could see it being one of two things. Like, I, on one end, think it could be genuine. I feel like politicians often, if they're like a lame duck president or something, wait till the end to kind of implement things because they have nothing to lose and they have no one to please anymore. So maybe this is something that was on his agenda that he never really got to do. But on the other hand, he is then pushing that decision, whether to implement that or not, onto the successor, which it doesn't seem like they're going to take that up. So, you know, I feel like I need a little more context, but like I could see that being one of two situations.
Mm-hmm. Now, from your experience teaching, was there ever any sudden major policy announcement, either from a school level or a district level or a city level, that kind of impacted your classroom?
I don't remember necessarily like a big implementation while I was teaching, but because I was kind of between teacher strikes when I was in the classroom, but something just in general that CPS was, the Chicago Public Schools were implementing was a big push towards restorative justice in their disciplinary policies. And, you know, I love the idea of restorative justice, and we learned all about it in undergrad. I did my bachelor's in education. But just in my experience in the public schools, it was never really implemented in the way that it should have been. It led to a lot of like teacher powerlessness and bad behavior, and that was always a policy that was a struggle to teach under, having it not being implemented correctly.
Yeah, school discipline is obviously a very hot topic all the time. When they were starting that, did you feel like that you were supported in the implementation of it?
Not particularly. There was one school where we did have a restorative justice coordinator come in once every couple weeks, but I kind of willingly chose to participate in meeting with him, and he was great and he was helpful, but there, you know, it's nothing without full teacher buy-in, and it was definitely something that I was buying into, that, you know, this coordinator wasn't meeting with everybody. So it's nothing if it's only like a one-person effort.
Mm-hmm. Before they made that announcement, did it seem like they were gathering support from the teachers, or was it something obviously there are a lot of teachers who supported it, but did it feel more top-down or bottom-up when they made that announcement and that change?
I think top-down. I can't recall when this like started to be implemented, to be honest, but I think like my first year teaching, like it was written into like the policies already. But just in general, I mean, there was not talk about it amongst teachers, and it kind of seemed like a box admin had to check off, and like it was a lot of like involving students in the conversation with like what was done wrong, or, you know, why did the teacher discipline me, which is great. But at the same time, you know, restorative justice is also about like mending the hurt and not just like having a conversation and moving on.
Absolutely. All right, and now to get into the meat of the issue today. The whole gifted and talented programs, tracking advanced work is a contentious issue for all families, whether families who can get in or can't get in, what the school is like with these programs, what schools look like without these programs. So from your experience teaching, what was your experience with kind of tracking, whether it be separate classrooms or within classrooms or separate schools?
Yeah, so I taught in 3 schools overall in my time teaching. 2 were in the public schools and 1 was in the Archdiocese, so that's the Catholic private school district of Chicago. And I taught middle school math in both of them, so that's a highly tracked and highly tested subject. So I feel like I had a very distinct role and perspective on that. One of the Chicago public schools I taught in was tracked with students and one was not. And then the Archdiocese school was tracked overall middle school. So in the public school that was tracked, it was grouped English learners and then not below grade level necessarily because there were a lot under grade level, but more so below grade level than others together. And then there was another class that was everybody else. And as well as students who were like English proficient. And then in the Arch school, students were tracked like groups ABC by math and reading test scores and kind of like general teacher observations from class, from both of those classes. So every year at the end of the school year, we'd all get together and kind of confirm the groups or modify them if needed, if someone needed to be shifted up or down.
What did that look like in practice? Did the students ever share a class? Like, was there like art class together and gym class together, or were they kind of on completely separate tracks and completely separate classrooms for the whole day?
Yeah, completely like that was their group, and that was the group that they moved with. They had a separate homeroom that was a mix of all the middle school classes, but then they would go to their specific grade level and like travel with the same group all the time. Yeah.
So let's start with a little positivity.
Yes.
From your experience, how is this tracking or special academic programs able to benefit students? That's both high achieving students and low achieving students and students in the middle.
Definitely. So the good thing about tracking was, especially I'm thinking of when I was in the Catholic school, it really allowed me to push those who were above grade level like to the next level of understanding, especially math. So in the Catholic schools, for the most part, they teach algebra 8th grade, where normally that's saved for freshman year of high school, and that's part of the appeal of like, come to the Catholic schools, we teach algebra early. But, with those really intense like theory level questions, I feel like they had a lot of like very conceptual conversations with each other. Those just very meat of the math problems I was able to push them towards. As in like the below grade level students, I didn't see much of a benefit there. A lot of the times they really they took that personally, and they really did kind of feel like they were inferior when in those settings. And I really tried to like boost them with like growth mindset and, kind of taking the tracking out of it and trying to just be like, this is our math class, we're in math class, this is us. But it was tough for them.
Yeah, and then moving on to the next part, obviously, the possible drawbacks, the negatives of tracking. Like you said, there is a certain stigma for students who are put into these classrooms that it may be below grade level or whatever the schools decide to call it. And everyone likes to, you like to pretend that, if we call it the tiger classroom and that one's the lion classroom, then no one's going to know the difference. But the kids are very sharp.
Yeah.
They know the difference. So what, from your experience, the stigma and what other possible negatives were there from this sort of tracking method?
For sure. My above grade level kids, like not all, but with some of them, it would kind of transition into, they'd get a little bit of an ego from it. And it would kind of lead to either bullying or like not so subtle bullying of like the snarky comments and things to like the below grade level groups or like quote unquote lower groups. I use with quotes because that's how we talk in education. But like I said, the students who were not in like the advanced groups very much knew they weren't. And like you said, no matter how we called them, like at the art school, we called them ABC. And I was like, what if we called them, red, blue, yellow? And they're like, no, they still know. And I'm like, yeah, true.
Classroom A, classroom alpha, classroom aleph.
Like no matter what it was, they know who was who. And it kind of led there was like a divide amongst them and their peers for sure. And then also like mistrust towards school staff. A lot of the times, if you really didn't work to build a relationship with them, they felt as though we were out to make them feel bad about themselves for not being good at a certain subject. And that is hurtful. That's hurtful for a kid in their formative years. And it's hurtful to be a part of that aspect of it as a teacher. And also just there's a lot of parent pressure too. My child got demoted this year. Oh my gosh. And, there was a whole thing around that. Or like, oh, my son is in the advanced group, like good for him. There was a lot of divide and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did any of your schools track just kind of individual classrooms? Like, say, math was different groups, but English, it was everyone together or something like that?
No, but I do, that's definitely a system where I could see more benefit from, because then, it's like we're in this together and you can switch up groups depending on strengths with, from unit to unit. And I think, I think something like that would be seen as even just like team building within the class where, when it's across, like you said, when it's across a whole grade level and they see a very distinct, like these persons are always in the same class, that's kind of where that can come from.
Because at a certain level, I think, there's a lot of controversy and debate over tracking, but I think at a certain level, everyone kind of agrees that some level of tracking is appropriate. After all, we don't have one-room schoolhouses anymore. Currently in America, virtually every school is tracked by age.
True, yeah.
And that, I think everyone agrees, is kind of appropriate, not only because students are obviously developmentally different by age, but because there's kind of no risk for stigma in that. That if you put an 8-year-old in a different classroom than a 9-year-old, and the 8-year-old feels bad about it, you can say, like, you're with the other 8-year-olds.
Yeah.
It says nothing about their age. Their age says nothing about them, whereas their reading score can be interpreted to say something about them, whether it does or it doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so with that, virtually all school systems have some sort of tracking, whether it's advanced classes. New York City's Gifted and Talented program was particularly egregious because it started in kindergarten, and you had 4-year-olds taking standardized tests. But like we said, there's the middle schools, which often have honors classes and not honors classes, and high schools have honors, AP classes. And then when you get up to the university level, obviously the schools are in some way tracked. So from your opinion, what do you think would kind of be an ideal way to provide these advanced opportunities for students while mitigating any of the negativity of separating students by ability?
I honestly think high school. Because even like mid-high school, because high schoolers, the more you think about it, 15 is really young, 14, however old, they're a little younger. But like I said, that model of kind of tracking within the class, I feel like is beneficial. And then once you get to high school, they're all a little more self-sufficient and self-aware. And, when I was in high school, I refrained from taking any AP or honors classes until like junior year because I just knew with like the adjustment I went to Lane Tech's, which is a huge school. So like with the adjustment of going to that school, I knew that I couldn't handle it. And like, I'm glad I made that decision for myself. And I think a lot of high schoolers, we're giving them more autonomy to take control of their lives and, certain aspects of it at least. And, I think that's kind of a good age because then they're moving into college where, they definitely are going to take more control of their life.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that thought, since you were teaching middle school, and as someone, as you said, who you think that middle school should perhaps not be tracked, that brings us to differentiation of teaching. When you have a classroom with students of mixed abilities, of course, it means you want to meet every student where they are and teach them to their ability to make sure they're all growing and all learning, which is, again, much easier said than done when you have a classroom of 20 to 30 students all over the place. Did you teach an untracked classroom?
Yes, yeah, definitely. One of the public schools I was in was not tracked. And then just in general, even in my tracked classrooms, you would have to differentiate because, within if I had one quote unquote advanced class and then I had 2 other classes, those 2 other classes have a huge range of ability there. I left college assuming that I would not teach in a tracked course, just kind of knowing I would have to differentiate, like, period at all. Especially in Chicago, there's so many different languages spoken. There's so many different cultures and, whatever it is, any kind of diversity there is. And I knew that was going to have to be a big part of what I did.